In 1971, actually, President Richard Nixon entered a new era in global finance. He abandoned the Bretton Woods Agreement, and gold was no longer anchoring the global economy. We entered a period, a very interesting experiment of fiat currencies, anchoring fiat currencies, anchoring fiat currencies, anchoring. It's turtles all the way down. We entered into the modern financial era of no reference value at all. No gold, nothing. Just countries flailing about, entering into spurious wars, economic theoretical policies based on nothing, and a lot of money printing. The rise of the central bank, the holy central bank, the Ben Bernanke's, the Janet Yellens of the world, who we worship as priests in front of the cathedral of money printing. Now that era is coming to a close. The era of the US dollar as world reserve currency is coming to a close with the rise of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. Is it an asset class? You're darn right it's an asset class. How do we know that? Because as people abandon the fiat currency nightmare that's given us nothing but misery for 50 years, they're plowing into fiat currencies. Is it going to 100,000? You're darn right it's going to 100,000. Because there is trillions of dollars sloshing around in a cesspool called the global financial markets. There's absolutely no rhyme or reason to valuation on any of these assets whatsoever. And I saw a headline coming up here today, which immediately got my attention. So the exchange Kraken, right?
Kraken, Jesse Powell.
Jesse Powell at the Kraken exchange. They have told Schneiderman in New York to pound sand, basically. They're trying to dig into all the market making that goes on in these exchanges, and they want to know how price discovery works on these various exchanges. And so all these exchanges are saying, look, we're a post-regulatory framework. We're a post-fiat currency framework. We're entering a new era. We don't need the SEC, the CFTC, any of these regulators, because we're taking this thing to another level, and it's based on a whole different valuation model. And just to give you some context of my history in all this and how I got into it, was back in 1995, 1996, I started a company in Los Angeles called the Hollywood Stock Exchange. And we were trading virtual assets with a virtual currency on a virtual exchange. And to build that technology, which was pretty new at the time, I had to invent a technology. So I invented a technology called the Virtual Specialist Technology. It has a U.S. patent. I think it's 5950176 is the patent number. And so we were having to do price discovery on virtual assets. This eventually was sold to Cantor Fitzgerald in 2001, and they moved the entire thing to their office in New York, the top floor of the World Trade Center, a few months before 9/11. So there was an inability for them to really capitalize on that going forward. They wanted to introduce box office futures contracts, and I told them at the time that this would never happen. You would never launch box office futures contracts because the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America, is a very guarded monopoly in the United States without any competition. And they don't like the idea of price discovery on box office. They like to control that market with an iron fist, the 6 studios in Los Angeles. And sure enough, they didn't listen. They spent $20 million trying to develop a box office futures contract. And at the last minute for the Dodd-Graham bill, or is it Graham-Dodd? Or is it Graham-Dodd? They introduced a rider into that law saying outlawing box office futures contracts. So Hollywood is the only industry in America that has this kind of protection from financialization. You can't trade a box office futures contract, but you can trade futures contracts on almost every other industry in America because they don't want the competition. They don't want the price discovery. They don't want to interrupt the flow of their model to market their way into a box office event. And I find this a bit disturbing because it says that free market economics and price discovery is selective in America. We like it in certain markets, but not other markets. And being in the news business as I am, we're constantly butting heads with regulators who are trying to tell us which news is approved by the regulators. So This idea of free market capitalism being selectively applied to some industry and not others is now also applied to the news business. So some outlets, their news is considered to be more truthful than other news, and they don't allow the public to decide what they want to see, and for the public to make up their own mind about what is informative and what is relevant to their lives. Another word for this would be propaganda. So we live not only in price propaganda and a fiat currency propaganda, but we live in a news propaganda. The major outlets in America are into the most insidious, vicious propaganda and warmongering than we've seen in decades. The idea of free markets, which I'm totally in favor of, right? It goes back to the Enlightenment. It goes back to Adam Smith. It goes back to the transition of power from the frickin' Catholic Church to the Enlightenment, to the individual sovereignty, to the rights of man. It needs to be preserved. And markets are a way to get there. Free trade is a way to get there. Anything that interrupts free trade interrupts freedom. And anything that interrupts freedom is a reversion back to neo-feudalism. And we see that happening right now in the United States and presumably here in Canada. As wealth is concentrated in fewer hands, we're having the risk of neo-feudalism on the horizon. Crypto is the answer, in my view. And it is an asset class, and it is gobbling up market share, and the U.S. dollar is doomed. All fiat money is doomed, and any money that you keep in fiat money, only have fiat money, keep money in fiat that you're willing to lose. Right? Anything that's not in crypto is going to vanish. The biggest bubble in the world is the U.S. dollar. The stock market's in a bubble. The bond market's in a 300-year bubble. We haven't seen bond prices, sovereign bond markets this high in 300 years in Britain and in over 240 years in America. Think about that. It's in a multi-hundred-year bubble. When those bubbles burst, and they will, because interest rates can't remain near zero for a perpetuity to help keep insolvent banks looking like they're solvent, every single bank goes bust. Deutsche Bank is leveraged at 5,000 to 1. There's nothing collateralizing Deutsche Bank but some hamster in a vault somewhere in Munich. It's absolutely nothing. It's a mirage.
Let's get to the PowerPoint.
Damn it! Damn those banks! All right, what else we got here? Oh yeah, so what's that? That's the Genesis block. I see some applause already. This is the beginning. That's it. That's where it all started. Notice that the headline is Times in London, Chancellor on the brink of a second bailout of banks. Is that random? Did they just put that in there as a timestamp? Or is Satoshi making a comment? Well, it could be both, but I interpret it as a comment. The banking system is in jeopardy. It's a reaction, if you will. There's a very political element to Bitcoin that is not talked about that often. And I think that probably, to put it in context of where we are historically, it should be mentioned. All right, so there's Jamie Dimon, suicide banker. And people say, why do you call Jamie Dimon, a terrorist, a suicide banker? And when you think about it, the banks on Wall Street, they're cut from the same cloth as the jihadis. They misinterpret their basic texts, right? So in the case of fanatical jihadist, theocratically driven psychopaths, they kind of misinterpret the Quran. Here, Jamie Dimon totally misinterprets Adam Smith. I mean, he selectively reads books on economics to support his maniacal psychosis. They go to, terrorists might go to madrasas. Jamie Dimon and his crew go to the Ivy League schools, which are the madrasas of our era, who teach them economic models that are dangerous and fanatical. He's willing to kill himself and others for his beliefs. So he has no compunction about putting his entire society or himself at risk by pushing weapons of mass financial destruction, as Warren Buffett calls them, derivatives. He's willing to blow himself up, kill himself and anyone around him. So he's just a terrorist with a nice suit. Initially, he was very anti-Bitcoin. Then he came around a little bit. Now he's a little bit more pro-Bitcoin because the market's moving against him. And since he has no morals or ethics or any kind of soul, he's just going to go with the market. He's just like a dead fish will go with the current, right? He's not going to swim against the current because he's inside, he's dead. He's a parasite. He's a tapeworm. on society.
Comes the tapeworm.
But I'll spare you my Jamie Dimon the tapeworm impression because it's too vulgar. But just to give you an idea, yeah, it's pretty sick. We'll move on. We've been doing our show for like 1,300 episodes, and this is kind of the reaction we get. People are understanding that the enemy are the banksters, and it's not the concocted skirmishes, the war, the scapegoating that goes on right now. When the Democrats were in charge, you remember the Muslims were the enemy, and now that the Republicans are in charge, the Russians are the enemy. So it's all bull. The enemy are the banksters. That's our common enemy. So we got to get above the parochial, regional nonsense and scapegoating and bigotry. Wachovia, $380 billion in drug money from Mexican. Of course, they were bought by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, big position by Warren Buffett. Wells Fargo caught recently going into millions of customer accounts and stealing money. They get a slap on the wrist. The price of fraud and terrorism in America is roughly you get penalized 10 cents on every dollar you steal. That's the penalty. That's the business model.
And what do you think of that headline in terms of Wachovia laundered $380 billion? How is that compared to Silk Road, which was used as an excuse of, you see headlines like this all the time, that Bitcoin is used for money laundering or buying drugs or things like that.
Right, so Ross Ulbricht, it was with the Silk Road. He's now serving life in jail.
Anybody from Wachovia in prison?
No. Wells Fargo.
Anybody from HSBC? HSBC built, this was in the revelation. They never went to court, so I was going to say the court case, but there was never a court case. So this was in the discovery. What happened with HSBC is that they actually physically designed like the equivalent of a Trezor or a ledger. They created a physical box uniquely for the Mexican drug cartels to deliver money to HSBC branches in Mexico City. And here, they don't go to prison. They never were charged with anything.
They are given huge bonuses. And the bonuses are driven by stock options that go up in value based on the stock price, based on stock repurchases and buybacks funded by 0% interest rates from the central banks. So the central bank is an accomplice. So again, Bitcoin is fighting this fight. That's what Bitcoin is putting these guys hopefully 6 feet under. Bitcoin is the revolution. Bitcoin is the means by which there will be a lot of, as we saw in the 1930s, bankers jumping out of windows. That's part of the goal.
That was really fun, Max.
Oh, I enjoyed it immensely. Well, don't go away. Stay tuned for much more after the break. Stay there. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Special guest, Sonny Ray from Unicoin. Sonny, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on. I've been following your career really for a long time. And you're one of the earliest guys into Bitcoin. And of course, in India, it's a great place for Bitcoin to flourish because it is a next generation financial technology in a country that's looking for next generation financial technologies. And of course, it took off like gangbusters. It's hugely successful. And then I was just reading that the Indian government, they're not being friendly, Ray. What's going on?
So the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, has recently announced that, in short, they don't want banks and payment companies to be working with cryptocurrency companies like BitCoin.
Was it a surprise?
Was it a surprise? I've read the Bitcoin white paper like 6 years ago, so not a complete surprise, but yeah, a little bit.
A surprise. Okay, so here's how much contact do you have with the government now at this time with Unicoin, which is one of the largest crypto exchanges in India? How much interface do you have with the government?
Quite a bit. We know almost every regulator. There's like maybe 7 or different departments that are looking very closely at Bitcoin. We have relationships in many of them. But the different government bodies don't always work together. They're like a multi-headed monster, where one head kind of does things without knowing what the other one does to some extent. And so this was a little bit out of left field with the RBI's announcement, but. Like you said, in December, it's not just UnoCoin. Like, we started the show in India, but there's like 20, 25 exchanges, all by really, really smart people, backed by smart investors. But the RBI decided that, they didn't. Now, one thing that's important to note is they did not ban Bitcoin. So even there's politicians on YouTube saying, hey, if you want to buy Bitcoin with cash, you want to trade it between yourselves, go ahead. We just don't want the banking system interacting with it.
Is this a period of maybe a bit of transition from a Bitcoin naivete to a Bitcoin realpolitik? And what I mean by that is that when we all started in the business, when it got started, there was this feeling that it would solve problems and that it was a fantastic paradigm-shifting technology that would bank the unbanked, particularly in countries where, in India, for example, where this would be such a step up for a huge portion of the population that didn't have access to bank accounts. And so, and is it a case of now a slightly different mental attitude toward Bitcoin, if my question makes sense? In other words, the promise of Bitcoin is so fantastic, and yet it's being, in my view, I'll say this in my opinion, it's being stifled by a bureaucratic machine that maybe is not really going to take on all the warm and fuzzy aspects of this technology and why it's so great, right? What do you think about that, what I just said?
First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. I think we're at the then they fight you
That was
stage.
a famous Indian who said that.
Gandhi. I think we're kind of at that stage. I mean, look at the last 3 months since December. I mean, the price of Bitcoin obviously took a big hit, but you had like some of the biggest companies in the world, like Google, Facebook, and Twitter, saying that they're going to ban ads. You had banks, coming down on Bitcoin globally, and so I think it's hard, but I think at the same time it's kind of good. Why? Because you talked about banking the unbanked. So at UnoCoin, up until even now, we only deal with people who have bank accounts because we're forced to. But if we now cannot work with people in banks, we're only going to be working in the unbanked sector. So, in a weird way, it's going to accelerate our progress towards our goal. But like I said, in Bitcoin, nothing ever surprises you. Like I had a desk job for 10 years. I could go back to that. But I chose this space because it's difficult, it's hard, and there weren't enough people, working on these big challenges.
Okay, so you're ready to work around any obstacle that comes down in your way.
Crypto to cash. We're looking at crypto to crypto. We're looking at, white labeling. We're looking at, moving our order book outside of India, and maybe, there's I could list 20 different things that we could do. We're not going to die. We're a cockroach.
Right. Okay. Now, similarly in China, they're now going down the path aggressively of decentralized exchanges, right? Because the government's trying to attack the exchanges. The exchanges, as I've said from the beginning, have always been the point of failure because it's the interface with fiat. And if there's going to be a clampdown, that's where they're going to go. That's where they're going to attack. Moving along to now some comments made in New York about going after exchanges and just looking at their price discovery mechanism, how they maintain their order books. They want Kraken and other exchanges to start answering to regulators. Kraken's response has been basically, we don't care we're not going to answer your letter. We're not going to answer your inquiry. We're glad we're not part of New York, and we can exist without this regulatory framework. And they've taken a very that approach of damn the torpedoes. We're going straight ahead. Very aggressive. Are you guys part of that movement? Is this a global movement? It can't really be derailed at this point, can it?
No, but what will happen is entrepreneurs like myself and capital, and we have 150 employees and millions of users, we're going to have to focus our attention towards decentralized exchanges. And guess what? That's not such a bad thing, because when I think back to 5-6 years ago when I first got into Bitcoin, all we obsessed about was building a decentralized exchange. But I think it was early, but I think now the tech's come a long way. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but we are seriously considering that path as well.
Okay, so the Unicoin is breaking news, right? You're considering that model.
Absolutely.
Right. It's in the warehouse. It's on the shelf. You can pull it off, put engineers to work on it, and keep the lights on and keep rolling.
Better believe it.
All right, fantastic. So now let's talk about the conference. It's Blockchain Economic Event B, and how many years has it been running?
So I've been doing events for 6-7 years and starting in India. That's how I met my co-founders Satvik and Harish and Abhi and started UnoCoin. And so about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, I started living in Canada again because this is where I'm from. And I noticed a disconnect. I noticed that there was a lot of Bitcoin events, but it was like in coffee shops and bars and basements. And I wanted to do an event once every 3 or 4 months where people would look forward to it and they would kind of remember back and be like, hey, remember what Max said? And so that was the initial goal. Kind of the bigger goal was we wanted to be the catalyst for 10 unicorns out of Toronto. And like I just said on stage, you know, there's this like misnotion that we try and make money on these events. The truth is personally, I don't even make money on this event. And I'm telling you that because, not that there's anything wrong with making money, but I literally do these events because I love Toronto, I love blockchain, and I want the smartest people in the world, like yourself, like Adam Back, like Chris, I said it. I want people like you to come here and share the gospel of Bitcoin.
Well, it's interesting the way these events are kind of taken on different characters. So in the Miami event this past year, it was very Lambo-oriented, a lot of ICOs, and chesty, busty women. It's very like Playboy Mansion meets Satoshi. Okay. Then this event is more, as you say, you've got some original gangster types. Adam Back is here. You know, he's one of the solid guys. He's referenced in the white paper. You've got other really profile folks, and I met here 2 15-year-old kids that came to the event. They're into blockchain. They're figuring out how to apply blockchain to genomes and artificial intelligence. And this is what gives me hope, Sonny, is that this next generation coming up is completely empowered by blockchain, and they are ready to take this to the next level. Are you seeing that as well?
So for this event, tickets are $400 a head. If you're a student, you got a free ticket. I probably shouldn't say that on camera, but that was our kind of secret deal, was that we just wanted young people in here, because they're the future, so anyways, getting a little emotional, but definitely that's a big part of it.
Right, so the event itself, it kind of operates as a think tank and a gathering place and try to help the ecosystem in whatever way you can. Whereas a Unicoin, that's more of your day job, and you're pounding that forward and bringing it through the startup cycle. And how is the startup environment now? Is it the ICO market? Is that we had a huge ICO market in 2017? Regulators came in. They really put on a huge amount of not surveillance, but looking at all these types. Where are we in that cycle?
So in December, I did another event where we had Edmund Moy, the 38th director of the U.S. Mint, who's also a Bitcoin evangelist, as our keynote. That's what I'm saying. So we try and get like OGs, like you said. And anyway, so he came and he shared some insight with us, and he did say that, look, the hammer was going to come down on ICOs, and look, I'm a big fan of the free market. So from that perspective, I love, everything. But personally, as someone who spent time in the financial services sector, I worry a little bit about ICOs and what's happening now. And it could be argued that a lot of the clampdown now is happening not just because of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's been around for 7, 8 years, but it's because of this ICO phenomenon. Again, I caution people, that's why I do these events, is because I try and find some of the better projects and then put them on stage so people can interrogate them and ask them questions. But like I said, I think it's not a secret. I'm personally not super bullish on ICOs, but I do believe there will be a few that will succeed and might change the game.
The word around the street has always been that you can buy Bitcoin on an exchange, but you very quickly put it off exchange into cold storage, into a paper wallet, into a hard wallet, because these exchanges, they tend to be vulnerable. Going back to the Mt. Gox disaster, which everyone still remembers because it was a huge event. So at Unicoin, where is the industry on the security front so that people have more of a confidence that when they go to exchanges that they're going to be getting the security that they need?
So just on a side note, we partnered with blockchain.info, blockchain.com, and we have a partnership where through our API, a customer in India can buy and sell Bitcoin straight from blockchain, so meaning they're holding their own private keys, and they just hit our API to make the purchase. And as soon as the Bitcoins are bought...
So they become the account, essentially,
exactly.
like the money market account.
We're partnering with Jax, we're partnering with Mycelium, and so yeah, we see that as like the next evolution, right? Where people hold their own private keys, but we act as just the mediator for liquidity.
Right. Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Doesn't it?
And how has volume been trending in the last?
Volume is ridiculous, right? Up until December, we were onboarding 10,000 users a day. Like, we literally couldn't keep up with it. But obviously, everyone knows, like, in the last few months, the market's, definitely calmed down a bit. Personally, I kind of like it when things are not, like, through the roof and everybody and your neighbors talking about Bitcoin. I like it when everyone's like, no, this is never going to work and it's failed. That's when I get most excited.
What's the next event that we can look forward to?
3 or 4 months, we can do another one. I'm planning to do something called BlockChain Expo.
Okay.
Maybe later this year, much bigger, more grander, and
Wow.
yeah.
That sounds exciting.
Yeah, I do have to go back on stage right now, introduce
fair
someone.
enough.
Max, I love you guys.